Hello, and welcome to another episode of Wellness with EAC. My name is Nicole Guanzura, and I am so thrilled you are back listening to this show. For all my returning folks, I'm so excited you're here, returning listeners. Every single Wednesday, we've been chatting it up about all things career wellness. And I love that every single episode is usually inspired by something that I'm reading or something that's popping up from my career, but also things that you are sharing. And some weeks we are having one on one conversations, and in other weeks we have guests. And today is one of those special episodes where we do have guests come on and chat. And I will tell you a couple of reasons why I have guests on the show. One, I'm a really curious human. I want to know about people's stories, and I'm sure you are too. And part of the goal is to demystify what we see on social media or in the internet about people that you see a title, you see something, and maybe you now know about them, but you don't really know about their journey and where they've come from and what makes them who they are. And in the hopes that that will also in turn inspire you to look introspectively at your journey and where you've been, where you're going, and be able to resonate with some things that are coming from the guests' conversations and stories. And my third is a disclaimer that anybody that comes on the show, I've pre-vetted. I know that they're, good people that when you talk to them after they get off this show, they're not going to give you a different experience than the energy that they've received here. So you can, I just want to give you that safety guarantee that at least, at the very least, everybody who comes on the show to share is coming from a genuine and an authentic place. And they leave their information so you can reach out. They're okay with that. I have them fill out all the things so that you can connect with them. I'm so excited about having our guest today. I'm so excited to have Rob Morgan. Rob is a multidisciplinary creative, and you're going to learn more about what that means. He loves teaching. He was saying that the way he thinks about teaching is giving a TED Talk every Tuesday and Thursday. So he'll tell you a little bit more about that. And one unique fact about Rob is that he grew up in the antiquing business. So if you're reaching out to him, ask him about that. If he doesn't share about it on the show, ask him exactly what that means. So I'm really, really excited to introduce Rob, who's a teacher, presenter, designer. Rob Morgan, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Nicole. It's so great to chat with you on your podcast. It's a great honor. I think I told you this in the beginning. It's a great honor to be asked to be on the podcast, and the result essentially of a serendipitous collision of friends in common on LinkedIn. Lorraine Lee is a common friend, and she suggested that we meet each other, and one thing's led to another, and it's just so great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes. Shout out to Lorraine K. Lee for her Social Saturday post. Lorraine is awesome. And Lorraine will be on the show as well.
Oh,
So
cool.
I'm really happy that we're just all connected in this space. So, Rob, tell us more about you.
Yeah, so I am joining the podcast from my office at Washington University in St. Louis. I used to be at University of Washington in Seattle. I just switched the two words and moved to the Midwest, said goodbye to the water. And so I teach in drama. I'm my longest tenure as a creative as a set designer for theater. So I've designed more or less regionally across the country, different regional theaters. So I'm a set designer, and I taught that at School of Drama at the University of Washington in Seattle, and I
Mhm.
teach that, have taught that here for the last 13 years at what we call Wash U for short, Wash U in St. Louis. I moved here to be with my wife and her two kids, so I have two stepkids. I had a dog. It was clear that we were dating long distance. It was clear who would have to relocate. But I'm really glad I made the leap to come here to Wash U, and have really enjoyed teaching here for a while here. I directed for 5 years a really unique interdisciplinary program called Beyond Boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
It's an outgrowth of a class that I teach on creativity and continue to teach every fall called Designing Creativity, where we have 80 first-year students take the class. There's 4 TAs, undergraduate TAs. Myself and
Mm-hmm.
a colleague from architecture have all kinds of guests who talk about how they're creative in any number of fields, law and medicine and art and you name it, architecture, business. We had
Mm.
John Hamm, in fact, join the class last fall, which was pretty
Very
exciting.
cool.
So St. Louis native, John Hamm. I do that. I've during the pandemic, I needed something to do with my hands. And we had some windows in our home that needed stained glass. And so I taught myself how to do stained glass, and I continue
Wow.
to do that now for clients. We kind of ran out of windows in our own house to put stained glass into. So I do some of that. And lately I've been really intrigued and launched a website literally over the weekend called creativitycall.com. And essentially that is my hope to destigmatize the arts and
Mm.
humanities specifically. A lot of students, I hear more and more stories from students where I teach that they aren't allowed to take a class in art, that their
Mm.
parents just really think they should do a STEM field, computer science or something, really sort of secure. They think about these things, but there's a lot, I think. Even if you don't go into drama, there's a lot, in my case, drama, I think, can teach you all about public speaking, about being
Mm-hmm.
creative, about being a multidisciplinary, sort of interdisciplinarian across all kinds of fields, and elevating and celebrating the diversity of skills and talents in a project team.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, that's theater. You put a lighting designer and a set designer and a costume designer together. If there's no lights, no one can see the stage. If there's no
True.
costumes, everyone's naked. So I feel like there's a lot I try to espouse in my creativity class to students about, yeah, I know you're a business major, but
Mm-hmm.
did you know that, being confident, being in, being able to do a little improv,
Mm-hmm.
is going to make you a better business person. I recall I met somebody sometime that was an actress in my field of work, and her
Mm-hmm.
husband was a lawyer who, took her acting class. And, because if you think about it, your sort of final presentation to the jury is a performance.
Right.
So anyway, I am trying to, as best I can, reprise a lecture I did about a year ago here on my campus, and I've
Mm-hmm.
done a couple other times before. Reprise a workshop, interactive workshop about how to really recognize creative intelligences in ourselves, but also in our students.
Okay.
So that's a perhaps long-winded answer as to who I am, but there's a lot of different, I guess. I'm like an English muffin. There's lots of little nooks and crannies to who I am. So I think that's probably the first time I've compared myself to an English muffin, and probably should be my last time I do that. But uh, but
Okay.
that's kind of who I am. You'll see behind me, I have lots of little doll houses. I like to sort of joke that these are sort of doll houses, and other people make them full scale. So in my line of work, I make tiny little doll houses. As a kid, I liked to play with Matchbox cars. I'm dating myself now, but
Oh, yeah.
so now I make tiny little doll houses, and I get to see them come to life full scale. It's pretty exciting. I'm privileged to be in this line of work.
That is very cool. And, it was a very descriptive journey. I'm following through. Like I was telling you, going on your website the other day, I was like, I just went down this rabbit hole of like, okay, there's your stained glass work, which was really cool, seeing some of your lectures and all of this. And it just, reverberates in your personality and the things that you do. And I love that creativity, and you're able to showcase that because a lot of times I've always seen, I work for a construction firm at some point, and before we'd see the pictures, the renderings, and then you would see the architects kind of bring together and designers what this building could look like.
Yeah.
And I've always wondered about that. How is that made? How is that
Hmm.
created? And here you are. You're like, hey, before it comes into this giant set, right? You're making that, and just the attention to detail in that is really, really cool. And
Hmm.
I too have never heard anybody describe themselves or compare themselves to an English muffin. However, the nooks and crannies thing, it makes sense.
I think I recall an English muffin commercial that talked about nooks and crannies, but I I like to sort of, I think I would be, I'll tell you what I'll be terrible at. There's a wonderful director I work with in
Mm-hmm.
Denver, and she has, unlike any other director I work with, we talk, initially about this is what the play is about. We've all read it to that point, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and she asks a lot of questions like, well, what do we want the audience to think about or talk about on the car ride home after they see our show?
Right.
And but one question she always, I love it that she always asks this is, what would make this place suck? and uh, and we talk about what that means. Like, what's a
Mm.
production we definitely don't want to do? Like,
Okay.
and so for me, I feel like there's a bit of I would be terrible. I know what I would be awful at, and that is something that's repetitive, a widget maker, whatever that is.
Okay.
I know that I like to kind of populate my week with a lot of different things.
Mm.
Teaching, like you did in the intro, said in the intro, is a bit like improv. I won't say it's as polished as a TED Talk every time I teach, but I know that a Gen Z 20, 18-year-old basically in my class, um, it, I don't want to say needs to be entertained, but I need to
Mm-hmm.
make sure it's a interactive type of experience. So about 30 minutes
Absolutely.
into any lecture, I need to make sure there's an activity of some kind. And
Mm.
I've had students draw the person sitting next to them and then share that drawing in just 60 seconds. And there's a lesson that I'm trying to sort of learn. So there's this practicality or you might say collaboration in my class, in my creativity
Mm-hmm.
class specifically, that's built in, designed by design, part of the
Mm-hmm.
course. And I wish everybody, not just students, could take that class sometimes. I had a colleague of mine joined, who's my age, would
Mm-hmm.
join the class a lot last semester. She'd come to a random Tuesday or Thursday, and she said after class once, the highest compliment, she said, your class isn't just about creativity, it's about life. It's about how
Mm.
we choose to go through our lives. So, to finish out the sort of draw the person sitting next to you, after 60
Yeah.
seconds of drawing the person sitting next to you, the students almost inevitably, when they share that, they're given an additional 60 seconds to share it with
Mm-hmm.
the person that they drew. If I listen closely, I typically hear them say, I'm sorry, this doesn't look like you. It's really
Yeah.
bad. Like I've done your persona an injustice and I'm so sorry. And then I get them to reflect on if I had 80 first graders in that
Mm-hmm.
classroom. First graders have such, any child really, we all had such creative courage
Yes.
that when I share a picture of you that I did in 60 seconds, I'll be like, check this out, Nicole. This is like the best picture of you ever done. Like, and I feel like to an extent we have to tap back in to our child's inner child
Mm.
to
Mm-hmm.
truly be our creative selves. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of that. I think there's a lot of me reaching back into my history, the Matchbox cars and the tiny doll
Mm-hmm.
houses. That's there's something about that I think we tend to ignore about our childhood that really is the North Star for who we should be when we are adults.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's so important, I think, because also students learn in so many different ways. So,
Yes.
while, math was very challenging for me, always has
Me as
been.
well. Yes.
However, when I thought about, if there was another creative way to think about it, right now, my daughter's coming into first grade,
Yep.
and so we're going through this prep book over the summer, and there's so many creative ways. There was this maze, and you had to solve the problem to get the number that would dictate the direction in which you're
Yes.
going. So it's
Yeah.
no longer typical connect the dots. You have to think about it. And
Yeah.
depending on how you answer, it takes you in one direction or another. And I was like, where was this creative math? Maybe it would have helped my whirlwind mind
Yes.
to just really hone in on that creativity. But I also really appreciate the activities that you do with your students, because I know when I'm on campus and we're doing career wellness workshops with students, we start off typically with some kind of skills readiness assessment, because we want to
Hmm.
know, like, where are you right now? What kind of skill sets do you have from whatever you're doing? Whether your only job was ever to watch your younger sibling, or you were a lifeguard over the summer, let's start getting creative. Let's pull that. How does that transfer into transferable skills you could put on a resume. Let's think
Hmm.
through that. Oh, you did that? Oh, did you know that could be considered time management? You did
Yes.
this? Oh, this is, but they're not always thinking that. They're just saying, well, I was a lifeguard. Well, I
Right.
just babysat. Oh, I volunteered. But what are the skills that you
Yes.
learned? And then so you could see by the end of this of the session, and by the end of the 6 weeks, they're doing so much better. But by the end of that first session, you can see their minds opening
Yes.
up, eyes
Yes.
lighting up. Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate when there's a creative approach to how
Yeah.
folks are learning.
And this is, I'm so glad you said that because more than ever, I believe it is more challenging than ever to teach young people because they are, for the most, based a phone-based generation where
Hmm.
they didn't have to, as you and I did when we were kids. We were more of a play-based generation.
Yeah.
We had to get through and have interpersonal relationships, get over conflicts, things like that in person.
Mm,
And so a lot of my students, I've shared statistics to this effect that their generation is 40% less empathetic than the prior generation. And
mm,
it's as one of my sort of videos that I share with them, the speaker talks about, it's because many of us grew up holding a phone in our hand and someone else's hand in our hand. And
mm.
that I think has is a level of, and I'm not anti-phone. I know that these little computers we hold in our hands are very useful tools, but we have to be able
Yes.
to sort of learn when to uh, focus on just putting them away and just daydreaming. We have
Mm,
one of the projects in the creativity class we've done on occasion is called dedicated daydreaming, and
mm-hmm,
we have students in groups come up with test on themselves different methods of simply coming up with ideas that don't involve a phone.
mm-hmm.
Could be jogging 30 minutes every day for a week. It could be sitting under a tree. It
Right.
could be anything. But yeah, it's a challenging time to be a teacher because I haven't changed, or maybe I have. I think we all change, but my
Mm-hmm,
students have certainly changed in the last, I'd say, the last 15 years of teaching. And so I have to teach them a different way that
mm.
hopefully they take out of my class. I've had many students say the creativity class really sticks with them. Specifically, a section we do on failure. And I do a now famous lecture on failure, I
Yes,
guess,
yes.
where as students are entering the room, they receive, printed by yours truly, a certificate of failure. And the
Mm,
certificate reads to the extent that they are allowed to bomb and fail at a relationship, bomb an exam, and they are still perfectly worthy, credible human beings who have something
mm.
to contribute to the world.
Yeah.
And a lot of students have told me, that the silly piece of paper, that failure certificate you gave me, sat next to my desk for 4 years while I was a
Mm.
student to remind me that I don't need to, I can screw up once in a
Yeah,
while and it's okay. And
absolutely.
I'm still valuable as a human being in the world. But anyway,
That's so,
I
that's,
digress
yeah.
a bit. Yeah.
No, that's so important. I was hoping you would talk about it actually, because otherwise I was going to ask. So I'm glad you
Yes.
did.
Yeah.
And I will link it in the show notes as well,
Oh,
because I think more people just need to put their eyes on it and embrace it. And not just for the students, but just anybody who's doing life right now. You just need to
yeah.
be able to understand. And I really appreciated it so much because as an entrepreneur, there are things you just sometimes fall flat on your face,
Yeah. Yeah. I was talking
completely
about your
flat.
earlier episode with Jonathan
Yeah.
Duma, and
Yeah.
he talks, I think failure is something we all have to hurry up and have happen to us in order for us
Yes.
to get to where we need to go.
Yes.
There's absolutely no world where failure is not an option. In the failure lecture, I do a little, it's kind of silly, but I call it the wheel of misfortune. And it looks like the Wheel of Fortune, and
Hmm.
basically I share with students a failure by a famous person, and they have to guess who the famous person was.
Hmm.
And Oprah, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, all of these people, these icons of industry, who
Hmm.
we think were natural geniuses that never screwed up ever in their lives, that they were just perfect individuals. They've all bombed at something, and so
100%.
it's interesting. We know these successful people by their successes, obviously. We know Oprah because she's freaking Oprah, right?
Right.
Um, but yet we don't recognize that, yes, she failed, and
Hmm.
they all did. And so the interesting thing about this exercise is at the end of it, they're like, yeah, I never knew that Stephen King, for example, threw away his first novel. His wife fished it out of the trash,
Mm.
and he published it, and it was a hit. And so there's all these, I believe it's something that even myself, as difficult as failure is, it's something that I think we all have to kind of hurry up and get to and get past if we can.
Absolutely. And it's the getting past it, right? Because Oprah experienced a lot of failures and she also experienced a lot of people who failed her.
Yes,
And so
yes,
she could have just, I was just talking about this in a previous episode that, then you could essentially, by some society standards, say, woe is me because
yeah,
I've been failed, because I have failed. I would just like to stay here and
yes,
wallow in it and
yes,
soak
yes,
in it. And after a while, your mind believes that. And that's who
yeah,
you become. You embody that. And
yes,
so, how do you ever get past it versus I experienced it? Okay, let me decipher now. Okay, from the hurts, what happened? What do I need to work through from there? As I'm looking forward, okay, maybe now it's a little bit easier to try that thing because I know what it was like to fall flat on my face.
yes,
It can't hurt more than
absolutely.
that.
Yeah,
Next
yeah,
time there'll
that's
be a little
true.
padding because I might
Yeah.
fall again.
Yeah, my own
Yeah.
university does, I'm sure. I mean, there's entire offices. There's an institutional research office that crunches numbers for administration here. And we could tell you down to the specific student what percentage of students, for example, are in a certain demographic, what percentage are
Hmm.
pre-med majors, what percentage are a specific nationality. But but the one thing we can't do that I would guess is a quite a high number, and that is what percentage of our students have imposter syndrome. The
Mm.
ones that are kind of hunched over their book at the library late at night thinking it's just they might think that they are some sort of mistake by the admissions office of admissions, that they don't truly deserve to be here. and
Mm.
and once that seeps into a student and they begin to believe that, convince themselves of that, then it's really difficult to pull them out of that. But I do, and part of the failure lecture, as I recall, is also a bit about imposter syndrome and about
Yeah.
how you can find your colleagues like yourself, that we help elevate and celebrate each other. By the way, I have to say
Hmm.
on air, congratulations on being a published author as of today.
Thank you very
That's
much.
pretty freaking cool.
Thank
Um,
you.
but yeah, so I think that to an extent, that is unfortunately probably what's the word, kind of a silent majority of our students are kind of have an imposter syndrome issue because we're driven to be so perfect all the time.
Mm.
And social media does that too. I mean, I
Yeah.
know a lot of young women specifically, suffer from seeing, perfect body styles and everything else on social media, and think that that's, if they are not
Hmm.
that they have failed. And that's
Yeah.
just a tragedy in my opinion. But I'm doing what I can, trying to sort of. I just like the phrase "elevate and celebrate" my
Hmm.
students, and at my institution, there's a phrase coined by a former chancellor of student affairs, that we should know students by name and story. And so,
Mm.
even in a class of 80 students, as best I can, I try to not know, I do not try to also know John Smith, not just as John, but
Right.
also what John's passions are, what hometown John has, and those types of
Yes.
things. So,
That's so important. That personalization is key because in when a student is coming in and they just feel like they're just another number in a sea of other students,
yes,
that really impacts them, not just then, but going in long term when they're thinking about their experience, even though on the surface, John Smith might be doing really well in class, but John's not okay outside.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
So, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. Oh, this is
It's
so
challenging.
good. This
I
is this
hope
is so
so.
good. Oh my goodness. We
Uh,
we absolutely could just continue and go on.
uh,
So such good conversations.
mm.
But I have two more quick questions for you.
Okay. My
And
mom's Italian. She loves to talk, so I'm not sure I can do them quick.
quick, close enough to quick.
She has
Um,
conversations with wrong numbers. That's amazing to me. But I'm like, Mom,
oh,
do you know this person? No, no, but they needed
no.
help. It's like, oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, that's me. I talk to random people in the grocery line, and my husband would be like, "Did you know them?" No.
No, but
No,
I know them
absolutely
now.
not. But now I know them now, may never talk to
Yeah,
them again but
I love
for
that.
those few minutes.
Yeah.
So just reflecting, I know I've been reflecting a lot about just being conscientious of our experiences and what's going on with the students, with our lives and accepting certain things or overcoming certain things. Can you share one example of how you have overcome adversity in your life and what you've learned from that?
Yeah, yeah. The aforementioned failure lecture that I talked about.
Yes.
I sprinkle through roughly an hour and 20-minute lecture, three of my own failures.
Mm.
For example, there was a show I had a review. I just trashed my set. In fact, an early paragraph in the review says, aside from a dreadful set by Robert Mark Morgan. I remember all my reviews, by the way, verbatim, and
Oh,
the ones positive ones I couldn't tell you, but the ones
yeah,
that are
of
negative,
course.
yeah, it's maybe
Every
I'm
single.
Catholic, but so anyway, in this class, in this particular lecture, I go through three failures, and I end with the most personal one,
Mm.
that I am not afraid to tell students because I find that we often see our failures typically as professional failures. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't get that big contract, or I didn't get that book deal I wanted, or whatever it might be. And we all know that there are personal failures that affect us professionally. And
Yes.
so my overcoming adversity happened in the first day of my third year of graduate school in San
Mm.
Diego, California. I was going to San Diego State. I was studying scenic design for theater, and I was married to
Mm.
someone for the last roughly 2.5 years, who I got deeper and deeper into this cycle of negativity with her, because she had, and I didn't have a name for it at the time, but
Mm.
she had what a psychiatrist later told me was a borderline personality disorder,
Mm-hmm.
and she was also bipolar. So there
Mm.
were multiple suicide attempts, and things like that. And I was in a very dark place. And in a way, graduate school was easy compared to what I was
Mm.
experiencing. And that never happens, right? But
Yeah.
grad school was easy compared to what I had to deal with at home. And so fast forward to a summer, I spent actually here in St. Louis, interestingly enough,
Mm-hmm.
at a summer stock company here. And I told my parents, they came up to visit from Austin, Texas, where I'm from, to see the show I was working on and that type of thing. And they cornered me and they said, "We know something's up. My mother's a pretty intuitive person. Tell us what's going on." And they badgered me and badgered me. And I finally just told them what was going on. Those jobs that I told you my wife has, they don't exist. This happened and that happened, and I never told you. And so they went home. I went home to San Diego. And next thing I know, the first day of my third year of graduate school, there was a knock on the door. And it was my sister, who's a registered nurse.
Mm.
And my parents were there to essentially help me. It was an intervention of sorts, looking
Mm.
back. But they said, "We want to take you to breakfast." I'm like, "Wait a minute, what are you doing here? Like, I didn't
Yeah.
expect you drove 17 hours
Wow.
to go to breakfast." And so one thing led to another, and I was out on the sidewalk, and I was sitting in the back seat, and I brought my leg into the car, and my mom shut the door, and that was it. The car had child security locks. The car had a full tank of gas, and I was driven all the way home to Austin,
Wow.
from San Diego. You do the math; it's 17 hours or
Wow.
so.
Yeah.
And I sat down with a psychiatrist who helped me understand the vortex I was in
Mm,
with this person. And I'll never forget, he said, if you remember nothing from these sessions, remember that you made an honest mistake. You met
mm,
someone who you thought hung the moon, and they were very much the opposite.
mm,
So that's the adversity. I mean, when I got in that car, I had the shirt on my back and the shorts I was wearing, and I had nothing else.
mm,
And fast forward a bit more, and I got an apartment back in San Diego. I finished my third year of graduate school and took a job in Portland, Oregon, and you know, I I I got my head on straight. So
mm,
yeah, it's a tough story to tell, but at the same time, I try to articulate to students that if you've failed at anything, you can be a university professor. So, you know, you can be
yeah.
on Nicole's podcast. That's the top tier of success.
Mm,
But you know
yeah.
what I mean? I feel like it's important for them to know that happens. We all have
Hmm.
we all have failures, so personal and professional.
First, thank you for sharing that. It's tough to share something that is so deeply personal. But the fact that you are sharing that with your students, you're sharing it so openly on with the audience that listen to Wellness with EAC, and especially on a podcast where we talk about career wellness, when we talk about wellness in general and the various facets, it's really important. And those are conversations that I think if more people were having with each other or around each other in trusted spaces, it would really help, especially with some of these mental health crises that occur. I
Yes.
think it's so important. So I really appreciate you, Rob, just sharing that because if more people were having these conversations, I think it would do so much towards helping each other recognize when things are happening, situations are shifting. We talk a lot about mental health in our curriculum because sometimes these things are happening. You said this was happening in graduate school. So you're
Yeah.
you're you're pretty young, right?
Oh yeah.
You're in your early 20s. And so now even thinking about undergraduate students, they're even younger and are
Yeah.
not quite sure, is this potentially something that's going on? Is this abuse? Is this,
Right.
am I a victim of something right now? Is this person just really angry? Is it my fault that they're acting this
Yes.
way?
Yes.
And so that affects so much else around them. But I think the couple things that came out of there, one, for you to be able to recognize, um, one, unfortunately, what you were able to bear and not bear, and then also having the opportunity to have a loving family that
Oh
just
yeah.
came and took you,
Sure.
literally
Yeah.
scooped you
Yeah.
up.
My sister is one of the most stubborn people on the planet, and
Yeah.
she was like, she was driving for most of the way, and I was like, there was no turning back. Like,
Yeah.
and that's my entire family. I don't have any other siblings. I mean, when you have your sister and your parents at your front door, and you didn't know they were going to be there, and it's a bit of a shock.
Oh, yeah.
And so without them, I mean, in many ways, I'll say this, it's one thing to save someone's life.
Mm-hmm.
They saved my sanity, which I think is as
Mm,
important because, as you say, when you're in the midst of it, you don't know how bad it is because
mm-hmm.
it's a sort of trickle.
Yes.
It's a terrible analogy, but let's say your folks have a cat and they've
Mm-hmm.
been overfeeding that cat, and you see that cat maybe once every 6 months. You see the cat the next time, and they're like, your cat is enormous. Like,
It doubled in size.
what are you doing? You're
Yeah.
overfeeding Buster the cat. And so in a sense, I didn't know how bad it was
Mm,
until they literally intervened and brought me to a professional for that person to say, okay, here's what you're dealing with.
mm,
And I don't know what would have happened. I don't know. I mean, this is hard to say, but I kept restating in my own head in sickness and in health and in sickness and in health, you know, those typical
Mm,
vows.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
kept saying, I've got to be here through sickness. But it
Mm,
seemed it was 2.5 years of dealing with someone who, something was wrong.
yeah,
And I couldn't, I didn't have a name for it.
right.
I didn't until the psychiatrist said, literally, he said, this is the late 90s. He said, do you have access to the internet? And I said, I think the neighbors do,
Yeah.
and he said, I want you to look up borderline personality disorder. And
Mm,
and researching that was like opening up a window as if someone was at my window, I literally at my window writing it down. Like this is
wow.
what she was doing. And so I tell this story as difficult as it is because I want to help people. I want to help
Mm-hmm.
my students. I want to help people if they find themselves in a similar situation.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great book I will tell you called Stop Walking on Eggshells. That's a
Mm,
fantastic book about this. It's
okay.
not written for people with borderline, it's written for people who are loved ones of people with borderline. So
Mm-hmm. Okay.
anyway, it's a certainly, I think, for me, you mentioned adversity. It was a significant event in my life that gave me some perspective on what's truly valuable in life, what's
Mm-hmm.
necessary in life. If you take everything you have and strip it down to just what you're wearing, and then you start over, there's essentially a bit of an epiphany of sorts that
Mm-hmm.
you realize, I really didn't need that. I
Right.
just needed my sanity.
That's
And
it.
yeah,
That's it. And you're
right.
here to tell the story on the other side, right?
Right, right.
You're here to tell the story and help others who, and
Yeah,
I'll find the link to that book and put it in the chat and a couple
it's
of
a
other
great book.
resources, especially like crisis hotline and things like that
Sure,
for people
sure.
who, may find themselves needing it. I
Yeah,
think it's so important. And even if you don't know what it is that's happening, if you're just feeling uncomfortable, you're better off dialing 988 and asking
yes,
somebody at
yes,
any point
absolutely.
in the day, in the night. I give it to my students out like candy. Please call. Please
Yeah,
call. They expanded it. You don't have to remember the 1-800 number anymore. Just call 988 and somebody will be there to
yes,
support you and help you understand. Even if you think, oh, it's my fault, it's what, call and they can at
yeah,
least get you
yeah.
through that moment before you can get to
Yeah,
somebody to help you there. So,
absolutely. And getting back to the sort of, I mean, the larger idea of the creativity class and being
mhm,
our truly authentic selves, as
mhm.
I try to be in front of my own students, we cannot be that person, our true authentic selves, until we take care of ourselves first.
Yes,
And it's hard. We want to help each other. We want to help other people, and but you cannot take care of anyone else until you take care of yourself first. And
absolutely.
that's difficult. Speaking of wellness, that's a difficult one.
It is. It is. And speaking of wellness, what does wellness mean to you?
I feel like we've talked quite a bit about, I mean, wellness for me is about, again, prioritizing as selfish as it may seem, it's
Hmm.
important, is as important as anything else in your life. I was just talking to my wife recently. When I can, I like to throw the kayak on my truck and
Hmm.
I go for a paddle. And
Mm.
the goal, for the most part, is to spend an hour on the water and not seeing a single person and just
Wow.
sneak up on a turtle, like do those types of things. There's some beautiful birds. I see some beautiful blue herons take off, and you
Hmm.
can hear their wings flap. And there's I always come home from a kayaking, so even a short 2-hour kayaking trip, a more centered individual, someone who's, I guess, living in the present as opposed to the past or the future.
Hmm.
And so I don't know. I always feel like, yeah, I needed that. And you can't put it in a bottle. It's not a pill I can take. I gotta physically throw the boat on the truck and go for a paddle and just forget about things. Just
Absolutely.
sneak up on turtles.
Sneak up on turtles. And I'm sure somewhere out there, someone, if they've not figured out how to just get a kayak in a bag and you press a button and it inflates,
There
press
you
a
go.
button, it
Yeah, yeah.
deflates.
Yeah. I think all
So,
of us need that kind of salve, though, on our
mhm.
psyches that we need to have, whatever your version of kayaking is, that
Yeah.
that that you have to prioritize it. Sorry to
Absolutely.
interrupt.
Absolutely. No, no, no. That is great. That is fantastic. We all need that, which is why I ask every guest because we talk people naturally start talking about it, but I'm like right at the end, I always want to ask and just make sure because what I've heard about what you perceive of wellness, but also secretly, I'm probably going to clip all of these messages from guests about what wellness means to them. And
Mm.
that'll be an episode on a
And write a book.
day.
Yes.
Oh, you know what? There you go. What wellness? You know what? we, okay.
Yeah. We've
Yeah,
come up with what your first book might be.
that's it. That's it. You know what? Courtesy of amazing guests on this podcast and being able to do that and have folks just give a little further input, but talking about
Mhm.
what wellness means. It's so, so important. So, Rob, I really appreciate you being on the show. I mean, your insight and just the things you're doing, the way you're impacting students, the way you're impacting the world, and just I knew from the moment we had our first conversation, I needed you on the show. You're
Aw,
doing some amazing things. So, thank you.
very kind. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. How can people stay in touch with you?
They can go to creativitycall.com. Like I said, it's a relatively new something I'm trying to manifest in my life.
Hmm.
It's this workshop I want to do, even free of charge for the most part.
Hmm.
I want to just, I can do it online, I can do it in person, I can do it in your backyard. I don't know, that seems an odd place to do it,
Could
but
be.
I just feel like we need to, in the spirit of Sir Ken Robinson, who
Hmm.
passed away probably about a year or so ago. We need to elevate and celebrate the creative
Mm.
intelligences that not just our students but ourselves
Yeah.
are and value those in the same way we value computer science skills and things like that. I feel like there is a misperception about what even taking a drama class might do for someone.
Yes.
And I'm speaking again of my own area, but I also mean art and architecture and everything else. I think we are all this sort of patchwork of different diversity of skills and talents and passions,
Mm.
and I think the arts can be a piece of that puzzle for each of us, and so that's what Creativity Call is about. It's what I again, it's the full lecture is available on that website,
Okay.
and so there's a contact form at the bottom. If people want to contact me, they can certainly fill that out. But yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. I really do. And I'm a big fan of not just this podcast, but of you, Nicole. So it's honestly a very deep honor to be a guest. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rob. I am a big fan of you and the work that you're doing, and I look forward to more conversations ahead. And I look forward to folks listening to this episode. And for those of you who are listening, if you want to see Rob and I face to face, we are going to be on YouTube. Well, we are on YouTube as you're watching this. So we're on YouTube. If you want to take us on the go with you, we'll be on Spotify, Apple Music, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music. And if you Google Wellness with EAC, we're on Listen Notes. Pretty much there's an app on your phone that can play this podcast. I guarantee you that. So, thank you again for listening to this podcast. Subscribe. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. And until next Wednesday, take care and be well, everyone.